The quiet town of Montgomery, Alabama, had always seen Pastor James Matthews as a man of God, a leader, a guiding light in the community, and a devoted husband to his wife, Vanessa. Every Sunday, he stood before his congregation, preaching about faith, love, and trust. But behind the pulpit, he was hiding a secret so sinister that it would shake his church and the entire town to its core. Vanessa Matthews believed in her husband with all her heart. She had stood by his side for years, through the highs and lows of life, never questioning his word. So when he told her she needed a risky medical procedure, one that would ultimately lead to the amputation of both her legs, she never imagined he was lying. She never imagined that the man she trusted most was leading her straight into a horrifying trap. James had a plan. A cold, calculated, and heartless plan. He had taken out a $1.3 million life insurance policy on Vanessa, and in his twisted mind, her suffering was just a stepping stone to his financial freedom. Maybe he thought she wouldn't survive the procedure, or maybe he believed she'd be too weak to fight back. Either way, the money would be his. But things didn't go according to plan. Vanessa survived. And when the insurance company started asking questions, James realized he had failed. His plan was falling apart. The money he had been counting on wasn't coming. And with each passing day, Vanessa's presence became a problem, a loose end that needed to be tied up. So he made a chilling decision. If Vanessa wouldn't die on her own, he would have to finish the job himself. One tragic night, what should have been a story of survival turned into a horrifying tale of betrayal and murder. Vanessa, the woman who had loved and trusted her husband unconditionally, would pay the ultimate price for his greed. But James had underestimated one thing: the truth always has a way of coming out. What led a respected preacher down such a dark and twisted path? How did a husband go from protector to predator? And what was the fatal mistake that finally exposed his evil scheme? James Matthews wasn't just any man, he was a man of God, or at least, that's what everyone believed. At 48 years old, James had built a strong reputation as a respected pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. His church was small but loyal, filled with people who saw him as a guide, a mentor, and a devoted husband. To outsiders, James was a charismatic figure. His deep, commanding voice could bring a congregation to tears. He spoke of faith, hope, and sacrifice. But what no one knew was that James had a different kind of faith, a faith in money, in power, and in himself above all else. Behind the closed doors of his home, he wasn't the righteous preacher people thought he was. James had a history of financial troubles. His church barely made enough to support his lifestyle, and over the years, he had struggled with debt, always looking for ways to make a quick buck. Insurance fraud wasn't a new concept to him. He had dabbled in shady dealings before, but never on this level. This time, he wasn't just trying to bend the rules. This time, he was playing with life and death. At 45 years old, Vanessa Matthews was everything James pretended to be: loyal, kind, and deeply committed to her faith. She had been married to James for nearly 20 years, standing by his side through every struggle, believing in his dreams even when others doubted him. Vanessa was well loved in the community. She worked part-time as a nurse's aide, always putting others before herself. Those who knew her described her as gentle, soft-spoken, and selfless, the type of person who would give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. Her love for James was unwavering. She never questioned his intentions, never suspected the dark thoughts lurking beneath his warm smiles. So when James convinced her that she needed a serious medical procedure, she trusted him. She believed him when he said it was for her own good. She believed him when he said he would take care of her. What she didn't know was that James had already planned her death sentence. While Vanessa was the primary victim, James had another unexpected adversary: the insurance company. James thought he was clever. He had secretly taken out a $1.3 million life insurance policy on Vanessa, assuming no one would question it. After all, she was his wife, and if anything happened to her, it was only natural that he would be the one to receive the payout. But insurance companies don't hand out million-dollar checks without asking questions. When Vanessa survived the amputation, the company became suspicious. Why had James taken out such a large policy on his wife? Why had he done it so recently? And why was he in such a rush to file a claim? These questions would eventually lead to James' downfall, but at the time, he didn't care. All he knew was that his plan was falling apart, and he needed a new one. A final solution. James Matthews had spent years preaching about faith and trust. But behind his pulpit persona, he was plotting a scheme so cold-blooded and deceptive that even the devil himself might have taken notes. The plan didn't come together overnight. It started small, little whispers of manipulation, careful lies planted like seeds in Vanessa's mind. She trusted him. She had always trusted him. And that's what made her the perfect victim. Vanessa had been struggling with minor health issues, nothing life-threatening, just the kind of aches and pains that come with age. But James saw an opportunity. He convinced her that her condition was far more serious than she realized. "Baby, I talked to a doctor I know. He says if we don't do something soon, you could lose your legs anyway, or worse." Vanessa, always trusting, always believing in her husband's word, was terrified. She wasn't a medical expert. If James said she was in danger, why would she doubt him? What she didn't know was that James had already put his plan in motion. Months before Vanessa's so-called diagnosis, James had secretly taken out a $1.3 million life insurance policy on her. He was careful, making sure everything seemed normal, ensuring that if anything happened to Vanessa, the payout would come straight to him, no questions asked. He played his role perfectly, the concerned husband, the devoted preacher, the man trying to save his wife. But in reality, he was guiding her toward a medical procedure she didn't need, one that would leave her vulnerable, weak, and completely dependent on him. Under pressure from her husband and convinced that her health was at risk, Vanessa agreed to the life-altering surgery. Doctors amputated both of her legs, and she was left wheelchair-bound, her once independent life now completely in James' hands. For James, this was supposed to be the beginning of the end. He had likely assumed Vanessa's health would deteriorate after the operation, making it easy to collect his payday without suspicion. But there was one thing he didn't account for: Vanessa was a fighter. She didn't give up. She didn't fall into the frail, helpless role he had expected. She started adapting to her new reality, determined to live despite what had happened to her. And that's when James realized his plan had failed. The insurance company wasn't paying up. Questions were being asked. Vanessa was still alive, still talking, still able to tell her story. And for James, there was only one way out. If Vanessa wouldn't die on her own, he would have to kill her himself. For James Matthews, faith wasn't his true calling, money was. And when his debts piled up, he saw a golden opportunity: his own wife's life insurance. Months before Vanessa's surgery, James secretly took out a $1.3 million life insurance policy on her. He carefully forged the necessary paperwork, ensuring that he was the sole beneficiary. He made it seem routine, a precaution, something any loving husband would do. But this wasn't about protecting Vanessa, it was about cashing in on her suffering. He manipulated her into believing she needed a risky medical procedure. His hope? That she wouldn't survive. If the surgery took her life, he'd get a 7-figure payday with no suspicion. But when Vanessa survived, the real problem began. The insurance company started delaying the payout, asking questions James hadn't anticipated. Why such a large policy? Why the sudden claim? And why was Vanessa still alive if she was supposedly in such dire health? James realized he had miscalculated. The money wasn't coming. Vanessa was in the way. And if the insurance wouldn't pay out while she was alive, he had only one option left. She had to die. James Matthews had spent months weaving a web of deception, setting up his wife Vanessa for what he believed was the perfect crime. He had manipulated her into undergoing a life-altering amputation, taken out a $1.3 million life insurance policy, and waited for fate to hand him his payday. But fate had other plans. Vanessa survived. And with her survival came questions, delays, and a growing risk that James' scheme would fall apart. The insurance company wasn't paying out, and James' debts were closing in. He was running out of time. There was only one way to fix this. One evening, in the quiet of their Montgomery home, James put his final plan into motion. Vanessa, still adjusting to her new life without legs, was vulnerable. She relied on him for everything: transportation, food, even the simplest tasks. And James used that dependence against her. It's unclear whether Vanessa saw the danger coming or if she still believed her husband would protect her. What we do know is that she never stood a chance. Some reports suggest James poisoned her, a slow, calculated method to ensure her death seemed natural. Others believe he smothered her in her sleep, a quick, merciless act of desperation. By the time authorities arrived, Vanessa was gone. And James? He was already preparing to cash in. James wasted no time in filing the insurance claim. He played the part of the grieving husband, leaning on his church community for sympathy, crying during sermons, asking for prayers. To everyone around him, he was just a broken man who had lost his beloved wife. But investigators weren't convinced. The insurance company had already flagged his claim as suspicious. The timeline didn't add up. The sudden, unexpected death of Vanessa, right after a failed payout, set off alarms. And when authorities dug deeper, they uncovered the twisted truth, the forged documents, the medical deception, and ultimately, the cold-blooded murder of an innocent woman. James thought he had pulled off the perfect crime. But in the end, greed always leaves a trail. When Vanessa Matthews was found dead, her husband, James Matthews, played the role of a devastated widower perfectly. He cried during her funeral, leaned on his church for support, and spoke of his unwavering faith in God to get him through such a tragic loss. But to investigators, something about Vanessa's death felt off. Vanessa's passing was unexpected. While she had recently undergone a double amputation, there was no clear medical reason for her sudden death. She had been adjusting, working through physical therapy, and showing no signs of fatal illness. Then came the insurance claim. James wasted no time filing for the $1.3 million payout, but the insurance company immediately flagged the claim. The sheer timing of Vanessa's death, so soon after her surgery and just months after James took out the policy, raised suspicion. They began looking into the details and contacted law enforcement. Investigators dug into Vanessa's medical history and found no previous records of life-threatening conditions, nothing that would have warranted such an extreme surgery. When they spoke with Vanessa's doctors, the truth became even clearer. No doctor had ever diagnosed her with a condition requiring amputation. Her medical records showed no sign of the illness James claimed she had. The decision to amputate had been heavily influenced by James himself. The deeper they looked, the more disturbing the case became. James had orchestrated the entire medical deception, pushing Vanessa toward a life-changing surgery for one reason only: money. Phone records, financial documents, and interviews painted a chilling picture. James had been secretly shopping for life insurance policies before Vanessa's amputation, lying to her about her health to convince her she needed the procedure, searching online for ways to speed up insurance payouts after a spouse's death. The most damning evidence came from former church members who had grown suspicious of James. One person anonymously tipped off investigators, revealing that James had joked about getting rich off insurance money months before Vanessa's surgery. Vanessa's body was exhumed for an in-depth autopsy, and the results were shocking. She had been poisoned. Toxicology reports found traces of a lethal substance in her system, one commonly used in slow, undetectable poisonings. This sealed James' fate. He had spent months manipulating Vanessa, and when his insurance scheme didn't pay out, he made sure she was eliminated. After Vanessa's sudden death, authorities had their suspicions. The insurance company had already flagged James' claim, and detectives began peeling back the layers of his deception. What they found was damning. James had taken out the $1.3 million insurance policy just months before Vanessa's surgery. He had lied to her about needing the amputation, coercing her into a life-altering procedure she didn't need. He had tried to rush the insurance payout, only to be denied when Vanessa survived. And when all else failed, he took matters into his own hands and murdered her. With enough evidence to move forward, James was arrested and charged with murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. The trial became a media spectacle, shaking the Montgomery community to its core. The once beloved preacher now sat in an orange jumpsuit, his carefully crafted persona shattered. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture, a man who had manipulated, deceived, and ultimately killed the woman who trusted him the most, all for money. Former church members testified against him, describing how James faked his grief, using his wife's death to gain sympathy while secretly plotting to collect the insurance payout. The most heart-wrenching testimony came from Vanessa's family. Her sister spoke through tears, calling James a wolf in sheep's clothing, a man who preached love but practiced evil. James, once so charismatic in front of a congregation, had no words when confronted with the evidence. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just a few hours before returning their verdict. Guilty on all charges. James Matthews was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never see freedom again. Justice for Vanessa. Vanessa's family finally had closure, but her story remained a painful reminder of how far greed can drive a person. James thought he could outsmart the system, but in the end, the system caught up with him. And the preacher who once stood at the pulpit, preaching about salvation, now spends his days behind bars, condemned by his own sins. Vanessa Matthews trusted the one person who was supposed to protect her, her husband, her pastor, her partner in life. But behind his loving words and comforting sermons was a cold-blooded killer, driven by greed and deception. Her story is a chilling reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes, they wear the mask of a loving spouse, a respected leader, or even a man of God. If you found this case shocking, there are countless more just like it, cases where trust was shattered, love was betrayed, and greed led to murder. We cover the most twisted, heart-wrenching family crimes here on the Crime Spotlight. So if you want to hear more true crime stories that expose the dark side of human nature, make sure to subscribe. And don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. What do you think was the biggest red flag in this case? Should insurance companies do more to prevent crimes like this? Let's discuss. Justice was served for Vanessa, but how many others aren't so lucky? Stay aware, stay informed, and stay safe.